I never expected the deepest cut to come from the people who shared my own blood. One moment, I was holding on to the quiet routine of everyday life. The next, I was staring at a message that reduced family to a dollar figure and left me feeling both disposable and deceived. Betrayal is never sudden. It builds quietly, hidden in small assumptions and unspoken debts, until the day it becomes undeniable. That was the day my silence ended and the reckoning began. Before we get started with today's story, let's hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what brought you here today? Your comments make this space more than just storytelling. They turn it into a shared journey. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you can always stay close to the heart of our stories. Now, grab something cozy, open your mind, and let's uncover the tale waiting for you. My name is Margaret, and I am 56 years old. I live alone in a small wooden house on the edge of Denver, Colorado, where the foothills of the Front Range rise in soft, sloping lines against the sky. My house is modest, nothing remarkable from the outside, but it has been my shelter for more than a decade since my divorce. The walls hold the quiet rhythm of my days, and though some would call it loneliness, I think of it as survival. Every morning begins the same way. I wake to the faint chill that creeps down from the mountains, shuffle into the kitchen, and put the kettle on. The scent of fresh ground coffee fills the small space, blending with the faint creak of the floorboards under my slippers. Light filters in through the curtains, pale at first, then spilling across the wooden counter as the sun clears the horizon. With my cup in hand, I sit at the small table by the window and open whichever book I carried home from the library last. Sometimes it is a thick history volume. Other times, a dog-eared novel that someone left behind. Books, like coffee, anchor the mornings and remind me that small rituals can shape entire days. I work part-time at the county library downtown. The hours are light, and so is the paycheck, but it keeps me connected to the community. People recognize me there, not by name, but as the librarian lady. Children wave when they return books, and older neighbors stop to ask for recommendations. There is comfort in being useful, even in small ways. Still, I am acutely aware that my job provides just enough to cover utilities, groceries, and the medicine I take regularly. When I finish at the library, I often walk through the neighborhood. Birch trees line the streets, their pale bark bright against the Colorado sky. Dogs bark behind fences, joggers pass by with earbuds in, and now and then someone greets me with a smile and a good afternoon. These are fleeting interactions, but they stitch me to this place. My neighbors know me as quiet, reliable, the woman who waters her garden at dawn and keeps to herself. I keep a blue notebook tucked in a drawer near the kitchen. Inside, every expense is written in neat columns under headings like Yane, house, medical, and emergencies. I am not wealthy, but I am careful. My late mother left me a modest savings account in a local bank, and I treat it as untouchable, a safety net I pray I never need. My financial caution is a habit born from years of tightening belts, stretching groceries, and telling myself I could wait another season before buying new shoes. My son, Ethan, lives in Boulder with his wife, Lauren. They are younger than me by decades in spirit, always rushing, always planning, and always assuming the world will bend to their schedules. We speak little, mostly short texts about holidays or logistics. I do not press for more. I learned long ago that pressing for closeness often pushes people farther away. I think back to the years after the divorce, when I had no choice but to fix leaking pipes myself, climb a ladder to change a bulb, or shovel the driveway before work. At first, I felt stripped down, abandoned to tasks I had never been trained to handle. Over time, Those tasks became symbols of something I had gained: independence. Yet, independence is heavy. It is not the romantic version in novels. It is the kind that leaves you standing in a dark house with a wrench in one hand, telling yourself you are strong while no one is watching. Family gatherings happen once or twice a year, but I hover on the sidelines. I set the table, refill drinks, collect plates when everyone has finished. Conversations roll around me like a tide, full of laughter and arguments I do not join. People are grateful for my help, but they do not notice my absence when I slip into the kitchen. For years, I told myself that peace came from avoiding conflict, from keeping my mouth closed. Yet, I have begun to wonder about the price of peace. Silence can keep a family dinner from unraveling, but it also teaches others to overlook you. In my own house, with coffee cooling on the table and the wind humming outside, I find myself asking if my quiet life is truly chosen, or if it is simply the only life I have been allowed to keep. If you're still watching and this beginning strikes a chord with you, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. The afternoon sun spilled across my kitchen counter while I rinsed the last of the dishes. The kettle had just cooled, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. My phone vibrated on the table, and I wiped my hands before reaching for it. The screen lit up with a message from the family group chat. At first glance, it looked like any other vacation promotion: bright skies, a turquoise pool edged with palms, and glasses of wine glinting in the sun. But below the glossy picture was a single sentence typed by my son, Ethan. The vacation is $750 each. If you do not have it, stay home. I stared at the words. They carried no warmth, no suggestion that I was wanted or included, only the blunt tone of a transaction. I thought about typing a reply, something polite, a question, perhaps even an explanation that my income could not stretch that far, but the words withered before they reached the screen. I erased them one by one and finally let the message sit unanswered. For a long while, I just stood in the kitchen, the house silent around me. Outside, children played on bicycles in the street, their laughter cutting through the open window. Life went on, but in my chest, something tightened. I knew Ethan understood my situation. He knew I lived on careful budgeting and that even small indulgences required planning. The message was not a suggestion. It was a gate with a price tag, a reminder that if I could not meet the terms, I would be left behind. That evening, while folding laundry into neat stacks on the bed, my phone buzzed again. I expected another casual update from the family chat, but instead, the alert carried the weight of warning. A fraud notice from the bank filled the screen. My stomach clenched as I read, "Unusual activity detected." I opened the banking app with trembling fingers. There it was, a charge already pending, the same amount Ethan had mentioned, linked to the resort in Florida. The confirmation email arrived almost simultaneously, glowing at the top of my inbox. My eyes tracked across the screen until they found the name. The reservation was under Lauren, my daughter-in-law. I had not shared my card with them. I had not given permission. Yet here was proof that someone had reached into my account and treated it as their own. I froze, unable to move for a moment. Then habit took over. I locked the card, changed my password, and stared at the empty inbox once the confirmation messages cleared. The room felt colder than before, as if the act of theft had seeped into the air itself. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence again. My hands rested flat on the wood, palms warm against the grain, but inside, I felt a sharp chill. For years, I had told myself that keeping peace meant staying quiet, that avoiding conflict was the glue that held fragile bonds together. But the cost had shifted. It was no longer measured in strained smiles or awkward silences. Now it came in numbers, in stolen funds, in permissions I had never given. I thought back to all the times I had chosen silence, times when Ethan and Lauren spoke over me, when decisions were made without my voice, when I paid for things that were never repaid. Each time I told myself it was easier to keep the waters calm. Tonight, I saw those moments differently. Silence had not been peace. It had been permission, a green light for others to cross the boundaries I never defended. I stayed at the table until the last of the sunlight faded from the window. The air in the house was still, but the stillness was no longer soothing. It pressed against me, heavy and sharp. I closed the laptop, set my empty glass in the sink, and let the weight of the evening settle. Something had shifted, and I knew this was only the beginning. If the story is starting to pull you in, drop a number 2 in the comments. I want to see who's staying with me as we uncover what happens in Chapter 3. The morning after the fraud alert, I sat at my kitchen table with the bank's warning still sharp in my mind. My coffee had gone cold before I could bring myself to dial Ethan's number. The line clicked after 2 rings, and his voice came through cheerful, as though nothing unusual had happened. I steadied my tone and asked why my card had been used without my permission. He laughed softly, the kind of sound he used when brushing off small concerns, and told me it had already been handled. He said they were only helping me secure my spot for the vacation so I would not miss out. His words framed theft as a favor, and his tone carried a weightless dismissal that left me feeling as though I had overreacted. Before I could answer, I heard Lauren's voice cut in from the background. She sounded bright and breezy, as though she had been waiting to explain. She said they would pay me back after their tax refund arrived, that it was only a temporary matter. Her assurance was delivered with the ease of someone confident the explanation was more than enough. But the words triggered an older memory, one that still lingered like a bruise. 2 years earlier, when their kitchen renovation went over budget, Lauren had insisted I help cover the remainder. She had called it an investment in family gatherings, a promise that once the refund cleared, they would repay me quickly. I agreed then, convincing myself it was only a loan. That check never came. Months passed, and when I finally asked about it, Ethan sighed, Lauren smiled, and the subject faded into silence. I never brought it up again, telling myself it was not worth the fight. Hearing her use the same excuse now, almost word for word, pulled me back into that disappointment. My stomach tightened. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, listening to Ethan's easy breaths, to Lauren's casual tone. My quiet objection that they had crossed a line was swallowed under their confidence that this was just family helping family. The sigh in Ethan's voice made me feel like a difficult customer rather than his mother. I ended the call without anger. I did not shout, did not accuse. I simply said nothing more and pressed the red button. The silence afterward filled the kitchen like smoke, thick and suffocating. I looked around at the clean counters, the neatly stacked dishes, the quiet order of my home. Everything appeared normal, yet nothing felt safe anymore. I pulled the printed reservation email from the tray beside the printer. The glossy resort logo sat at the top, and below it was Lauren's name typed in bold. I slipped it into an old accordion file I had not touched in years. Each tab inside carried labels: house, taxes, medical. At the very back was one marked in faint handwriting: trust broken. My hand lingered on the paper as I slid it under the tab. For the first time in a long while, I was not discarding evidence of disappointment. I was keeping it. Once the first page was filed, the act became easier. I logged into my account and printed the bank's alert notice. Then I opened past statements, marking the date of the charge, underlining the numbers with a red pen. Each sheet went into the folder. Piece by piece, I created a record that could not be erased by apologies or vague promises. When I closed the folder, I set it neatly on the table and pressed my palm against its cover. It was a small gesture, but it carried more strength than anything I had done in years. For too long, I had believed silence was strength. Now, I realized silence had only been a blank space others filled with their own choices. This folder was different. It was my choice, my action, my first step towards something more than endurance. The kitchen no longer felt like a place of quiet routines. It had become the place where I drew a line. The folder sat on the table like a marker of intent. I knew nothing was solved, and I knew the conflict was far from over. But as the morning light stretched across the floor, I felt a flicker of steadiness return. If you feel the tension rising and want to know where this is headed, type number 3 in the comments. Let's continue together into chapter 4. The invitation to the family video call arrived as a simple calendar link in the group chat. No one asked if I was free, only assumed I would log on. That evening, with my laptop open and the folder of printed statements beside me, I clicked the link. Faces filled the screen in a mosaic of glowing squares. Ethan and Lauren sat close together, their background blurred to hide the kitchen behind them. A few cousins were already laughing about swimsuit choices. The energy was light, almost festive, as if money were an endless current carrying them forward. For the first several minutes, I stayed silent, watching the conversation move quickly from restaurants to excursion packages. Lauren's voice rose above the others, describing spa treatments as if they were already booked. Ethan leaned back, nodding as if all of it had been settled. My name did not surface once. I waited, listening, feeling the familiar hesitation press down on me. When I finally unmuted my microphone, the chatter slowed for only a moment. I said I needed to address something before they finalized plans. The silence was polite but thin. I explained that I had received a fraud alert from the bank and that charges for the resort had appeared on my account. No one reacted with surprise. Lauren tilted her head and gave a practiced smile. She said it had been a family decision, that the reservations were already made. A cousin laughed lightly and added that it was only money, that everything balanced out eventually. Their voices carried the same breezy certainty that had brushed me aside countless times before. I shared my screen, opening the banking statement where the highlighted charges glowed against the pale background. I pointed to the numbers, steady but quiet, explaining that this card was the one I kept for medical emergencies. My words landed with no more weight than the clicking of keys. Within seconds, the conversation shifted again. Lauren asked about matching swimsuits. Ethan nodded along, eyes flicking over me without focus. The screen filled with overlapping voices, each one smoothing over my presence. I let the chatter wash past me, waiting for someone to pause, to acknowledge what I had said. No one did. My chest tightened, the familiar pressure I had carried for years whenever my boundaries dissolved in the noise of others. I knew if I raised my voice, I would be labeled dramatic, difficult, ungrateful. Instead, I reached for the mouse and clicked Leave Meeting. The sudden silence of my kitchen was almost physical. The voices cut off mid-laughter, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I closed the laptop and placed my hands flat against the table. The papers I had prepared lay neatly stacked, but they had changed nothing. Words, I realized, would never be enough. I picked up the folder and slid the latest printouts inside. With a red pen, I circled the resort charges, marking them as if they were evidence in a case. One by one, the pages filled with red rings, sharp against the black text. Filing them felt like building a wall, something solid where my words had failed. When I set the pen down, I leaned back and let the stillness of the room settle around me. My first attempt to reason had ended as so many conversations before it had ended, with dismissal and laughter. But this time I was not left only with disappointment. I had proof in my hands, a record they could not erase with smiles or excuses. Something inside me shifted. My voice had been ignored, but my resolve had deepened. The folder rested on the table, heavy for its size. I looked at it and knew the next step would not be about asking again. It would be about protecting what was mine. If you're still following this journey and want to see how the pressure builds, comment number 4 right now. Next up, Chapter 5. The folder on my table had grown thicker each night. What began as one printed email about the resort booking became a stack of statements, receipts, and notes marked with a red pen. I stayed up later than I should have, combing through the online archive of my accounts, moving slowly line by line. At first, I told myself I was only searching for reassurance, that the hotel charges were a single mistake. But reassurance never came. Instead, I uncovered a pattern so precise it was impossible to ignore. A streaming service appeared under my account, billed every month for nearly a year, one I had never signed up for. A sushi restaurant in Portland charged 3 times, though I had not set foot in Oregon for years. Then came the spa membership, a chain Lauren often posted about on her social media pages. The bills were small enough to be hidden among groceries and utilities, timed just far enough apart that I had overlooked them. Taken together, they formed a trail. Each charge was like a breadcrumb leading back to the same truth. Someone had been using me as a silent benefactor. The shock settled into something harder. My hands shook as I highlighted each transaction, but with every mark the shaking slowed. By midnight, I had a list nearly 15 items long, all tied to places and habits that did not belong to me. I spread the pages across the table until the wood disappeared under lines of red ink. The folder labeled "Trust Broken" groaned as I slid them inside. It felt heavy in my lap, almost alive, as if it carried not only numbers, but the weight of years I had stayed silent. The next morning, I dialed Ethan. My voice was calm when he answered, though inside my chest my pulse hammered. I read out the dates, the amounts, the companies. I told him these charges were not mine. I expected at least a pause, a flicker of recognition or regret. Instead, I heard his sigh, long and familiar, the same sound he made when traffic slowed or when a waitress forgot his drink order. He told me I was overreacting, that it was nothing serious. Before I could respond, Lauren's voice joined the call. She spoke quickly, her words bright with practiced ease. She said they had only borrowed, that I had always been willing to help, that this was no different. She framed the theft as family generosity, as though my savings had been theirs all along. I listened in disbelief, waiting for her to acknowledge the deception, but she never did. Then the words shifted. Ethan's tone hardened, accusing me of being cold about money, of caring more for dollars than for people. Lauren echoed him, saying my fixation was tearing the family apart. Their voices overlapped, turning my evidence into accusation against me. The weight in my chest tightened, though not with guilt. I realized they were not trying to explain. They were trying to silence me. I let their words wash over me, each one sharp but predictable. In that moment, I remembered the voicemail still saved on my phone. Lauren's voice, sweet and insistent, asking for my card number, promising it was temporary, proof that the story she now told was a lie. I did not play it for them. Not yet. Instead, I sat quietly, letting the truth settle inside me. They had crossed from denial into attack, and there was no pretending anymore. When I ended the call, the silence in my house was dense but steady. I placed the phone down and set the folder beside it. The battle was no longer about a vacation or a single charge. It was about the erosion of dignity, the quiet thefts dressed up as obligations, the years of being overlooked because it was easier for them that way. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. The confrontation had left me shaken, but it had also stripped away the last layer of doubt. I knew exactly what I was facing now, not a misunderstanding, not a mistake, but a pattern, and I would not be silent anymore. The house was still after the call ended, but the silence carried no comfort. I sat at the table, my shoulders locked in tension, the words from Ethan and Lauren echoing like a chorus I could not shut out. Cold, selfish, obsessed with money. Their voices had tried to bend the truth, to paint me as the one who had fractured the family. I pressed my palms against the table, steadying myself, breathing slowly until the air felt less heavy. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the saved voicemail. I had nearly deleted it the night I received it, convincing myself I did not need to hold on to more proof. Now I pressed play, and Lauren's voice filled the room. Sweet at first, then quick, almost urgent, asking for my card number, promising it was only to hold a reservation, swearing she would cancel immediately. The recording ended in silence, but the damage lingered. No one could deny what those words revealed. It was not an accident. It was intention. For years, I had convinced myself that silence was strength. I had told myself that avoiding conflict was a form of protection, that peace was worth the cost. Yet the cost had grown heavier with each passing year. Money lost, promises broken, dignity chipped away. If I chose silence again, the weight would crush what was left of me. I realized then that the greater betrayal would not be theirs, but my own, if I refused to act. I pulled the folder closer and slid a fresh page inside. At the top, I wrote in firm ink, "Voicemail, March 9th. Beneath it, I transcribed the words line by line, each one a nail pinning down the truth. I added it to the section already filled with statements and receipts. The folder no longer felt like a record of loss. It had become a shield, proof that my memories were not distortions, that my boundaries had indeed been crossed. The decision rose inside me slowly, like water filling a basin. At first, it felt impossible. To involve outsiders, to bring the police into something branded as family business, seemed like tearing down the last bridge. But when I weighed the options, the truth sharpened. Silence meant allowing the theft to continue. Speaking meant risking the collapse of bonds already frayed. There was no path that preserved everything. I could only choose which part of myself I was willing to lose. I dialed the number for the local police station. My voice trembled when I explained the situation, but the officer who answered spoke with calm certainty. He said I had every right to protect myself, that what I described was not a misunderstanding, but a crime. His words steadied me. For the first time, someone on the outside confirmed what I had begun to believe in my bones. After I hung up, fear pressed close. I knew Ethan and Lauren would not accept this quietly. They would twist the narrative, claim betrayal, cast me as the one who had broken trust. The thought ached, but I no longer flinched from it. Better to carry their anger than to carry my own shame for letting it continue. I returned to the kitchen, set the folder neatly in the center of the table, and rested my hand on its cover. The wood beneath it was warm from the sun that had shifted across the room. For a long time I sat there, listening to the ordinary hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the faint sound of wind against the windows. Life outside went on unchanged, but inside me, something irreversible had taken place. I whispered the words I had been afraid to claim. I am ready. It was not dramatic, not even loud, but it was steady. The choice was no longer ahead of me. It had already been made. There was no turning back. If the turning point has you hooked and you're ready for the fallout, type number 6 in the comments. Let's step into Chapter 7. The morning after I filed the police report, the air inside my house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were carrying the weight of what I had done. I had not slept well. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard the officer's calm voice reminding me I was doing the right thing. But that reassurance wrestled with something deeper, the fear of what would come next. I had broken the unwritten rule of silence that had governed my family for years, and there was no taking it back. By midday, the phone would not stop buzzing. Calls stacked one after another, messages lighting up the screen like sparks from a fire. I ignored them all, but my hands trembled each time the device vibrated. Curiosity got the better of me once, and I opened a notification. A photo of a golden sunset filled the screen, Lauren's caption written in perfect sorrow. Imagine being betrayed by the one person you thought you could trust. Beneath it, comments from friends and distant relatives poured in. Sympathy, encouragement, words about resilience and heartbreak. The narrative had already begun to shift. In their story, I was no longer the wronged mother. I was the villain who had turned on her own. I set the phone face down and left it on the table. I tried to busy myself with ordinary tasks, washing dishes, folding towels, watering the plants. Yet each small act seemed hollow, as though I were moving through someone else's life. Outside, the sky darkened with approaching rain. I could almost hear the storm gathering, pressing closer with each tick of the clock. On Saturday morning, when I opened the curtains, I nearly dropped the mug in my hand. Ethan stood on the porch, arms folded, his expression somewhere between irritation and pity. He had not knocked. He was simply waiting, as though I owed him an explanation. I opened the door, and he stepped closer, his words sharp but practiced. He said I was going too far, that I had humiliated him and made Lauren look like a thief. He insisted I was blowing apart the family over something as small as a few hotel reservations. His voice carried the same weight it always had, the authority of someone who believed his perspective was the only one that mattered. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. Instead, I reached for my phone, opened the save voicemail, and pressed play. Lauren's voice filled the air between us, sweet at first, then quick and urgent as she asked for my card number. She promised she would cancel the reservation afterward. The message ended, leaving silence that pressed harder than any argument could. Ethan's practiced smile faltered. For a moment, he looked caught, younger, unsure of how to frame what he had just heard. His face shifted, color draining, and his gaze slid away. But even then, he muttered that I had gone too far, that I did not need to do all this. He turned and walked down the steps, his shoulders tense, his stride heavy. He did not look back. When the door closed, the silence inside the house felt different. It was still heavy, but cleaner, as though a long hidden truth had finally been dragged into the open. I went to the kitchen table, pulled the folder close, and added a new page labeled Voicemail March 9th. The folder had become my witness, proof of a reality that no amount of denial could erase. I sat quietly after that, letting the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tap of rain against the windows anchor me. There was grief, yes, but also clarity. I had chosen to protect myself, even at the cost of my son's approval. The path behind me was gone, but the air ahead felt open, even if uncertain. After Ethan left, the house felt different. The silence that spread through the rooms no longer carried the weight of accusation. It was stillness of another kind, one that asked me to decide what came next. I sat at the table with the folder open, papers neatly arranged, the word voicemail still fresh in my handwriting. The evidence was there, but the loneliness pressed in on me. For all that I had gathered, the thought lingered. Perhaps no one would believe me. Perhaps I would be left standing alone with my truth. That night, as the rain tapped steadily on the windows, I realized I could not keep this burden sealed inside. My mind kept circling back to Talia, my niece. We had not spoken in months, maybe longer, but I remembered her silence at family gatherings, the way she withdrew when conversations turned toward Ethan and Lauren. A thought began to form. Maybe I was not the only one. The next morning, I drove across town to her apartment. The air was cool, streets still damp from the storm. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as if letting go might make me turn back. When I reached her building, I hesitated in the car, staring at the small balcony dotted with flower pots. Finally, I climbed the steps and knocked. Talia opened the door slowly. She wore a sweatshirt, hair tied back, her face wary until she saw me. Then something in her expression softened, and she stepped aside without a word. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. It was quiet, orderly, the space of someone who had built her own fragile sanctuary. We sat at the kitchen table, 2 mugs between us. The silence stretched until she finally spoke, her voice low but steady. She told me about the rental car, how Ethan and Lauren had used her name years ago, insisting it was only a temporary fix. She was 22 at the time, too unsure of herself to say no. The bills arrived later, late fees and toll charges that she could barely manage on her paycheck. Her eyes dropped to the mug as she admitted she had thought it was her fault for trusting them. Her story loosened something. More memories came from her, one after another. A cousin whose credit card had been drained. An aunt who had been persuaded to cover part of their tax bill after a so-called paperwork error. Each story carried the same shape: borrowed trust, broken promises, silence in the aftermath. I listened without interrupting. Each account pressed against my own memories until the pattern became undeniable. It was not a single act of carelessness. It was a system they had built, practiced, and disguised under the language of family loyalty. When I left Talia's apartment, the sun was dipping low, coloring the sky with the shades of orange and gray. I hugged her briefly at the door, nothing dramatic, just enough to remind her she was not alone. Driving home, I felt the weight shift inside me. The shame that had pressed so hard began to loosen its grip. It was not just me. I had not imagined the betrayal. Back at my table, I pulled a fresh page and wrote across the top in bold letters: Pattern of conduct. Known victims. Underneath, I listed names, dates, fragments of testimony. The folder thickened with more than evidence. It carried the voices of others who had been wronged but too afraid to speak. I closed it carefully and set it in the center of the table. The silence around me no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like a chorus waiting, a quiet strength reminding me I was not alone, and that the fight ahead was larger than myself. If you've stayed with me this far and want to see how it all ends, comment number 8 below. Now, let's move on to the conclusion of this story. Janine's house sat at the edge of town, a modest colonial with a long dining table that had seen years of birthdays, arguments, and uneasy reconciliations. She had offered it as neutral ground, though I doubted anything about this situation could be called neutral. Still, I agreed, because there was nothing left to gain by silence. The truth had to be spoken in a way no one could deny. I arrived early, carrying a manila envelope that felt heavier than its weight. Janine greeted me softly, her eyes searching mine as if for reassurance she could not give herself. I placed the envelope on the polished table and sat down, waiting as the house slowly filled. The sound of footsteps, coats shrugged from shoulders, and hesitant greetings filled the room. Ethan entered behind Lauren, who wore oversized sunglasses though the sky outside was gray. Her hand clutched his arm like a lifeline. Other relatives trickled in, cousins, uncles, aunts, some curious, some uneasy, none sure what role they were about to play. The room was restless until Lauren spoke first. Her voice trembled, though I could not tell whether it was practiced or real. She claimed there had been a misunderstanding. She said I had never directly told them not to use my card. She insisted that everything had been done in the spirit of family and that intentions had never been malicious. Her eyes swept the room, searching for sympathy, for someone to nod and relieve her of responsibility. Ethan sat beside her, head down, gaze fixed on the table, his silence louder than her words. I let her finish. Then, without raising my voice, I reached into the envelope and pulled out the stack of folders I had prepared. One by one, I handed them to the people gathered. The room grew quiet as pages were turned. Bank statements marked with highlighted charges, screenshots of hotel bookings, transcripts of Lauren's voicemail asking for my card number, and a list of recurring patterns that tied everything together. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. A cousin frowned deeply as she flipped through the pages. An aunt pressed her lips tight, her eyes wet. Another relative held the papers like they were legal documents, scanning them line by line. No one spoke. The silence was not disbelief. It was recognition. Proof had taken away the comfort of doubt. Lauren leaned toward Ethan, whispering something urgent, but he did not look up. He sat motionless, his practiced composure cracked. The truth left no room for performance. I stood, smoothing my coat, and spoke only once. I said I was not there to fight, but to stop what had been allowed to continue for too long. I did not explain further. I did not argue. I left the words and the evidence behind me. Then I picked up my bag, walked to the door, and stepped out. No one followed. No one asked me to stay. The silence behind me was louder than any confrontation. Days later, Ethan's email arrived. 3 pages long, filled with accusations that I was selfish, cold, uncaring, and that I had destroyed the family. He invoked our father's name, claiming he would be disappointed in me. Yet between the lines of anger, I read the confession. He knew the truth was undeniable. Some relatives cut ties altogether. Others sent late-night messages admitting they had seen warning signs for years. Their words did not comfort me. They only underscored how long this had been tolerated. I felt grief, but also something steadier. The illusion of family harmony had collapsed, but in its place stood clarity. I had preserved what mattered most: my dignity, my independence, my right to say no. The cost was high, but silence had cost me more. In the weeks after the family meeting, my world grew smaller, yet clearer. I went to the bank and opened a new account entirely separate from anything Ethan or Lauren had touched. The clerk stamped the papers, and I felt the weight of control returning to my hands. Soon after, I met with a notary to update my will. A single new line stood out on the page. No shared financial responsibility shall be assumed unless documented in writing. The words were both shield and declaration. A few days later, a call came from a credit company. Someone had attempted to open an account in my name, but the fraud alert blocked it automatically. I did not feel fear. Instead, I thanked the caller and logged the incident. It was proof that my efforts were not wasted, that my boundaries held firm even when tested. Relatives drifted away, some in silence, others with sharp words about betrayal. A few reached out quietly, offering apologies they had never spoken before. My circle narrowed, but in that narrowing, I found a strange relief. smaller but healthier. Then came Talia's message. She invited me on a weekend trip to the mountains. She had already booked everything, receipts attached, no assumptions, no hidden lines for me to fill. I said yes. On the train north, I stared out at the trees passing by and realized how quiet my mind had become. It was not absence, but calm, not silence forced by fear, but chosen peace. When I returned home, I unpacked slowly. I wrote a note on a small card. My boundaries are not up for discussion. I pinned it by the front door, a reminder to myself. For the first time in years, the quiet of the house felt like freedom. In the end, every story of betrayal carries within it a lesson about boundaries and the price of silence. To protect others while neglecting oneself is not devotion, it is surrender. The strength to speak up, even when it unravels when bonds once thought unbreakable, is the beginning of freedom. Silence may preserve appearances, but truth preserves dignity. The moment we draw the line and refuse to be diminished, we reclaim not only our security but also our voice. What remains after the storm is not emptiness but clarity, not absence but peace. In that stillness lies the reminder that saying no is not cruelty. It is survival. And survival is a kind of love for oneself that no betrayal can erase. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, follow for more reflections, and subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters here.